Today I'm going to be making this bookcase. It's going to have a white gloss finish, it's going to have adjustable heavy duty shelves, and it's pretty much all going to be made out of MDF. Hiya, welcome back to Gosforth Handyman, and welcome to my first video with a commentary over it. We'll see how this goes. If you've got any questions, just pop them in the comments and let us know what you think of a commentary video for a change. In this video, I'm building an MDF bookcase. I had a number of specifications from the client of what they wanted. It's going to be about 2.1 meters high, which is nearly 7 foot tall. It's going to be just under a meter wide, and it's going to be about 300 mil deep, which is about a foot deep. It's going to have heavy duty adjustable shelves capable of supporting some very heavy books, so you'll see all of the shelves are reinforced to take that extra weight. Nearly all of it is going to be made out of MDF because it just paints really well, and the whole thing's going to have to be built in 2 halves so it actually fits in my truck for transport and then installation on the client's site. So I've put the design together on SketchUp already, and obviously the client signed off on it and they're happy with it. And then from there what I do is I print out all the plans, stick them on the workshop wall, and I include kind of exploded plans so I can see what's going on inside it. I've already put together a cutting list so I know exactly what size all of the various panels are in the unit, so I'm going to do all of the cutting first. So as I say, I'm making this out of 18mm MDF. These sheets are notoriously awkward to deal with, quite heavy at about 40 kilos each, so my first task is to cut these into more manageable sections. And of course sharp pencils are essential for all of this. So I'm just using the track saw here to rip down the sheet into some more manageable sizes. So again, I'm just going off my cutting list here that I've put together, so I know what size everything needs to be. What I'm making here first of all is the shelves, because I need to get the reinforcing battens glued on, and the glue needs to dry on those. All the shelves are the same size, so I'm just using one shelf as the template for the next shelf to make sure they're all the same size. And this is a really quick job to do on the track saw. The foam stuff that I'm using underneath the track saw, it's just to support the wood really. It's just a Celotex foam, and it works really well for a bit of a sacrificial surface to cut the wood on. So what I'm doing for the cross cuts, I'm just using a framing square to keep the shelves perfectly square. I'm not showing you all the rips because it gets a bit boring, but these are the fronts of the shelves and also the underside supports for the shelves as well. And now I'm just putting the shelves together, so I'm putting a decorative strip on the front. The decorative strip also provides a lot of extra strength for the wood, and I'm putting a reinforcing strip underneath. So once these are glued and nailed on just with brad nails, once these are dry, it forms a very rigid structure for the shelves, so these will be more than capable of taking the weight of pretty much any book. You'll see when I'm putting the back supporting piece on, I'm just using a spacer, a 10mm spacer, to keep the same distance away from the edge. And now comes the first slightly tricky bit, is just while I've got nothing supporting any part of the actual bookcase unit, just getting the wood into a kind of self-supporting position. Once I've got these first couple of little braces in, that kind of holds everything together and stops the wood from flopping all over the place. So I pop these 2 supporting strips in, which are at the base of the bottom unit, and then I'll also glue and brad nail the bottom shelf onto those 2 supporting pieces. And then this is just the top of the bottom shelving unit going in. And you'll see that the edge of it is rebated slightly. You'll see what that's for when it comes to assembling the shelves later on. Just checking for square, make sure everything's square. These units are just brad nailed and glued together. It's more than enough because there's going to be a lot of other supports holding this together. It doesn't need anything more than that for a unit like this. So I've just got it all clamped up, waiting for the glue to dry. So for the rebate on the back side of the unit, you'll see I've got just a piece of wood clamped to the edge, and that just gives me a bit more support for my router. Really dusty part of the project this, so I've got my dust mask on, I've got my goggles on. You can obviously also do this on a router table, but you would have to have done that before assembling the unit, so I decided that I was going to do the rebating after assembly, which I think is a little bit quicker on a project like this. Big sheet of 6mm MDF that I'm using for the backs here. Again, just getting it cut roughly to size to make it a bit more manageable, and then do all the final accurate cuts of the actual back size once I've measured out the size of the back, including the size of the rebate. What I haven't shown with the back is that I've obviously had to round the corners to cater for the rounded rebate from the rebating bit. So I've rounded the corners just using a sander. It's 6mm MDF, it sands very easily to put the rounded corners in. And then the back gets glued and brad nailed in place, and the back also helps keep everything square as well. Just checking for square, and also checking on the diagonals as well for square, and we're all good. Just a sanity check that I haven't made any glaring mistakes. And then, as I say, just brad nailing it all together. Quick clean out of the excess glue, and then that's the bottom unit ready to dry out overnight, ready for the next bit of work. And then we've just got the top unit here. Again, I'm just doing a dry fit of the back. I've already rounded the edges of the back panel. It's slightly tight on one corner, so I'm just using the block plane to take probably 0.5 millimeter off one edge, just to get a perfect fit. And then again, that's just glued and nailed in place. So you'll see I've just made a little jig out of some offcut of laminate that I use for doing the shelf pin supports, for doing the blind holes. If you want to know more about this jig, let me know in the comments and I'll do a separate video on it. But all I do is I use a block of wood at the bottom to set the height. And then I use a self-centering drill bit to mark out the position for each hole. And then after that I use a 5mm bit which has a stop on it, so that I go exactly the right distance into the MDF. It's really quick doing it this way, but there's a lot of holes to drill, so I still have to set aside maybe a good hour just for doing the shelf pin holes. So all I'm doing now is gluing and nailing on the bottom trim piece. I've already put a moulding detail on the edge of it with the palm router. It's just a 1/4 inch round over with a slight thumbnail on it. I've mitered the corners so everything, including the corners, gets glued together for a nice tight miter on the corners. Again, just gluing and brad nailing all of this in place. And you can see here I've just got a slight misfire from the nail gun, so I'm just having to pull that out and it'll get filled afterwards. I like to use a CA glue for the delicate little moulding, so I'm just using, it's effectively super glue with an activator. So I'm putting the glue onto the moulding trim, the activator I've sprayed onto the MDF, and then I just stick the whole thing in place, and it gives a very, very strong fixing. So after that, it's on to the mammoth task of painting it. So the whole thing needs 3 coats of paint. It's getting an acrylic primer undercoat first of all. I'm using a Leyland acrylic primer. I just do all the corners and edges first, just using a nice synthetic brush. And then on from that, I go on to use the roller for all the big areas. Just trying to get a really even coat at the minute. I'm not particularly bothered if it's blotchy at this stage. It's going to get another 2 coats of paint. As long as it's nice and even, there's no lumps in the paint or anything like that. That's the main thing I'm looking for at the moment. I find the foam roller gives a really nice finish on MDF, almost a spray painted finish. I'm just being really careful around the shelf pinholes not to get any paint in the holes. This is one of those areas that if you start getting paint in the holes, then you end up having to paint all the holes, and then you struggle to get the pins in the holes because they've been filled with paint. So at the point that you're painting over the shelf pinholes, you just need to make sure that your roller's quite dry so there's no excess paint going into the holes, and that you're not pressing too hard. Otherwise, if you press hard, the paint can just go straight into the holes and leave you with horrible kind of painty drips everywhere, and it looks awful. You're better to just do several nice dry coats, and that'll give a much better finish. Just lifting the unit up just so that I can do the bottom trim section. Again, this is just primer, remember, so all I'm looking for is a nice even coat at this stage. And now I've let the primer dry for a good couple of hours, and we're ready for the first coat of the water-based gloss. So this is the first coat of water-based gloss going on. Again, I do all the edges first, and then I go over the big areas with a roller. So this is the underside of the shelves that I'm doing at the minute with the first coat of gloss. This water-based gloss, again, it's a Leyland water-based gloss that I'm using. It dries very, very quickly. So by the time I've painted the entire unit, wherever I've started is dry and ready for the next coat. These big long trims, you'll see what they're for when I come to assemble the unit. So again, just getting the second coat of paint onto the unit. I don't film putting the third coat on, but I can assure you I have put a third coat on. Gets a little bit boring just watching me paint, but you get the idea. It's 1 coat of primer, 2 coats of gloss, and then that gives a really nice, as I say, almost spray painted finish with the foam roller. So once it's all dried, it's time to get the whole lot in the back of the truck. You can see I specifically designed the units to fit into the back of the truck. That was one of the key design criteria for it, because I had to think of how I was obviously going to get it to the customer's site. What I haven't shown is joining the 2 units together, but it's just basically 1 unit stacked on top of the other and screwed through from below. And now you'll see what all the trim strips were for, because they are going to cover the join in between the top and bottom unit, and they'll also form a face frame trim all around the unit. So the top corners are mitered and go all the way around the unit to give a nice neat finish. Again, these are just glued and brad nailed in place, and then I go over it afterwards and fill the nail holes and pop a bit extra paint over the filler. That noise, by the way, is just the compressor kicking in. Really noisy compressor, a little Stanley. The CA glue for these little trim mouldings I think just works really well, and it just minimises any risk of damage to the wood from the nail gun. You'll see there's a little mark on the face frame just from a knot that fell out of the wood, but that's been filled and painted, so that's all sorted. And then finally get the shelves in. Some of them are a little bit tight, but go in with a little bit of persuasion. I'd rather they're tight than too loose. You can just see the screw holes that are holding the two units together, and I've also applied a detail moulding around the top of the unit as well that matches the same moulding as the bottom. And for what it's worth, the moulding that I've applied in the middle actually matches the picture rail moulding that's already in the house, but I don't know if anyone really cares about that or not, but I always try to match mouldings if I can. And that's it, all done, screwed to the wall, solid, not going anywhere, will literally last a lifetime. Hope you enjoyed this. Any questions, pop them in the comments. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you next time.